Hey guys, this is your High Fist here with another juicy topic. First of all, Happy New Year to you, my beloved subscribers. And even though I didn't get to post that much on this channel, certainly not as much as I wanted to, have no fear, guys. 2025 was an incredible year for your High Fist, and I'm doing better than ever. So, we're back here in the Ruth and Bad dungeon for a brand new video because I figured, well, you guys deserved a New Year's gift. I don't think I've posted from this room in a long, long time, and it's good to be back. As always, thank you to Stephen Erikson for commenting and almost sharing the last video. I'm not too sure how long this video is going to be. I do have a lot of notes. But before that, I want to give a quick shout out to some Malazan channels that I found, some new content that I found. So I have it written down here. I found Caleb, the Imperial Historian, Dr. Erin Keating, and Four Corners of the Page. They have a lot of great content, so please check it out. A lot of new Malazan content. Caleb has a lot of law and maps. My favorite one was the one that he did on Red Mask, but they're all really fun. Dr. Keating does more academic stuff. And even though my personal favorite video of hers was the one about my video, the one I would recommend you start with is a conversation that she facilitated with between her students and Stephen Erikson. So for many of you who've seen many Erikson interviews, this will be a nice format change. And it's a very interesting discussion. Four Corners of the Page does this thing called Malazan Hot Takes, where people give their hot takes on the series. He has a lot of new people in these things, and he's also collabed with people who've done Malazan content for a long time, like Philip and Joanna, and Books with Banks and Alan, and all of them. So, for those of you who haven't seen all this new Malazan content, do check all these things out. I'll try to provide the links on the video description. It's always nice to see new voices, new faces, blah blah blah. So do check them out and give them your support, right? So hey, wait, hold on. Not Books with Banks. Everyone but him, because he rated the Baukule novellas the lowest in Erikson's body of work. So he's banished. He's exiled from Ruthenbad University. He's kind of like the Trull Senga of Malastube, and I'm Hanan Mosag, obviously. So consider this a shoning for his blasphemy. I mean, rating the Baukelane stories the lowest in Erikson's writing. I mean, come on. I can't condone that kind of behavior, and neither should you guys. So, with all that said, let's get into the video itself. Somebody's bursting firecrackers outside, so please ignore that. The video is about Erikson's use of smells, odors, scent, etc. It's not a topic I've seen anybody discuss before, so we might as well usher in 2026 in the sort of the smelliest way possible, I suppose. Now, most of us who've tried to learn more about writing fiction keep hearing this piece of advice repeatedly, right? That our prose should be evocative, that it should appeal to the reader's sense of taste and smell, and that you should make your descriptions tactile. You should stimulate the reader's auditory senses and visual senses and olfactory senses and blah, blah, blah. And as we know, Erikson does all of this pretty superbly. Whether it's him describing the thunder of sorcery, which is audio, or the spicy scent of the soul taken, which is olfactory, or the slickness of Taralak Weed's hair, which is tactile, the 10 big books are full of examples where Erikson stimulates a number of different senses, physical senses for the reader. And this is a big part of why his writing is so immersive. It's a big part of why his battle scenes have that Saving Private Ryan, Black Hawk Down type of up close feel that Erikson has talked about a lot. It's a big part of why his comedic subplots have that George MacDonald Fraser vibe. It's a big part of why his anthropological background meshes very seamlessly into his fantasy world building, because the reader is stimulated in a distinct number of ways, and we get transported into the scene where we can smell and hear and touch things, as opposed to just reading, placid or flaccid, whatever you call it, prose. So, as I said, we are just going to focus on the olfactory element here. And the more I thought about it, I was like, you know what? I'm going to pick one book, because 10 books would be, I mean, the video would be 10 hours long. And I went with The Crippled God, right? I mean, this is a full spoiler channel after all. So I just went with the entire book and picked out every single time the word smell or scent or odor or reek or stench are used in the final book, in The Crippled God. These are the words that I believe Erikson uses most often for olfactory stimulation. So I went through book 10 from start to finish to pick all of it up. And here is the results of my research. What I found was that in this particular novel, Erikson does not use the word odor at all in The Crippled God, which I thought was interesting, because he doesn't use the word much in the other books, but he does use them. Like in Dust of Dreams, for example, he uses the word odor when the Kachen Chamal are cooking their food. But for book 10, he seems to have decided, okay, I'm not going to use that word at all. He uses the word reek very sparingly in book 10 as well, which is also surprising, because in previous books, especially book 9, I found numerous instances of him using that word. But here in The Crippled God, the word is just, I think it's only used once, where he talks about the reek of sulfur in the air, and then maybe Piti talks about the reek of her own scent in the battlefield or something like that, but that's about it. The word scent is used quite frequently in The Crippled God, but not as frequently, once again, as I found it to be used in the other 9 books. In book 10, you have the usual stuff like the scent of death, the scent of freedom, blah, blah, blah. Erikson likes to do that, but he seems very restrained even with that word in book 10. He seems very restrained with words like scent, reek, odor, which is not that restrained with in the other 9 books. What he does instead in this novel is, and I don't think he does this as much in the other 9 books, what he does here instead is simply rely on the basic term smell to stimulate your olfactory senses. And he uses the word stench somewhat frequently as well. And I mean, stench is a word that Erikson uses quite frequently in all 10 books, right? So if you read Erikson's prose and his books quite often, you would be very familiar with things like the stench of burnt flesh, the stench of butchered animals. I think that's from this book. And he creates this atmosphere with these very harsh, vivid descriptions to pull us into the story. And as I pointed out in a previous video, maybe a year or two ago, on his use of the word sorcery, he also uses stench metaphorically. So, you would get things like somebody walks into a cave and there's the stench of ancient sorcery, or somebody's in the middle of a big magical fight scene and the characters can feel, quote unquote, the stench of howling warrens. I think there's an actual quote from either book 8 or book 9. I mean, think of that, right? In the middle of a big fight, he describes how loud the sorcery is, and he says, the sorcery detonated like thunder or whatever, which appeals to your ears. He describes these images to please your eyes. I mean, Erikson can really paint a vivid image, as we know. And he also uses phrases like the stench of howling warrens, to capture just how much warren action and chaos and volatility is going on in the course of this magical battle. So he even gets your nose involved in constructing the battle scene inside your head. But it's the use of the word smell that I wanted to highlight, because it's the use of the word smell in the Crippled God which really shows how deliberate, intentional, structured Erikson's writing is with the olfactory senses, with our noses. I'm sure many of you have seen the great conversations that Erikson has had with AP on his channel on the craft of writing, things like, psychic distance, POV control, and all that. And this to me is another example of that kind of intentionality behind every word and every sentence that AP and Erikson often talk about. So let me explain what I mean by that. As I was going through the Crippled God and picking out the use of the word smell, I discovered something mind blowing that I would have never discovered had I not undertaken this exercise. What I discovered was that in each of the 6 books inside the Crippled God, so the Crippled God, as you know, has 6 books within it. So in each of those 6 books inside the Crippled God, Erikson does a totally different thing with how he uses the word smell. In each of these books, Erikson uses the word smell in a different way and appeals to your nose to create a completely different effect and to put you in a completely different atmosphere. So in book 1 of The Crippled God, it all starts off nice and pleasant. The first uses of the word smell are to describe things like the wood smoke of a campsite, the sweet smell of a garden, someone describing the pleasant smell of tea leaves, the smell of grass once the dew has evaporated, the heady smell of alcohol being brewed. At one point, Talk has this fantasy of finding peace, and in the sort of vision that he kind of fantasizes about in his kind of peaceful future that he's dreaming of, he describes the smell of smoke from the hearths as people are just waking up from their tents, blah blah blah. So almost every olfactory sensation Erikson creates in book 1 of The Crippled God is very pleasant and soothing. And then in book 2, Erikson basically goes, haha, did you forget what kind of book you were reading? And he just punches you right in the nose. He punches your nose, rather. And he reminds you what series you're actually reading. Because from book 2, almost every use of the word smell, right from the start of book 2, it becomes more violent. Here, Erikson suddenly starts using multiple references to the smell of blood, for instance. And he evokes things like the smell of dust, the smell of crushed plants, and he even starts being metaphorical about it. He uses terms like the smell of trouble, the smell of fear. And at one point, Gessler talks about how the souls of his friends who were ghosts now were all hanging around like a bad smell, right? So in book 1, he made your nose calm down with these pleasant sensations. And in book 2, he kind of starts making it twitch and twist. In book 3, because of where the story itself is at the time, book 3 is all about the sea and the salt. So you get the smell of salty marshes, the smell of dead fish. One of the villages is described as a smelly fishing village. So it's all about evoking that kind of aquatic vibe, if you want to call it that. And it's quite cool that Erikson's not just randomly evoking senses and all that to immerse us into the story. Even the smells that he's giving us, even the sounds and the tastes and everything that he's giving us is reflecting in some way or the other on what's going on in the story itself. At the very end of book 3, going on until book 4 and the beginning of book 5, we then see a new pattern where the word smell is now once again used in a totally different way. So now for the next passage in the Crippled God, that is throughout book 4, with a bit of the end of book 3 and the beginning of book 5, throughout this extended passage, this new pattern is where the word smell is now almost exclusively used by characters to introspect on their own filth. It starts with what's his name, Shield Anvil Tanakalian, I think is his name, noticing how bad he smells. It then goes to Ruthen Bad, acknowledging Ruthen Good, acknowledging, well, I mean, Ruthen Bad has a far better sense of hygiene, I hope, but it goes to Ruthen Good, acknowledging how bad he smells. It then goes to Pity, noticing how she smells and the stench of the battlefield and how she's, really stinking and all that. And it once again then goes to Ruthen Good, trying to explain to the Tilanaimas why he smells of ice to them. Because he's like, look, guys, I'm not a Jagut. They're like, hey, you smell of ice, elder. Are you a Jagut? And he's like, no, 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 I'm not a Jagut or whatever. Which itself is quite interesting, right? Because the Tilanaimas don't have a nose, but they still say you smell of ice. So they're clearly referring to some other sensation that has replaced scent for them after the ritual of Tilan, which now equates to their version of smell in their zombie form or whatever. But anyway, that's the passage from the end of book 3 throughout book 4 and then book 5. We see this new chunk of how the word smell is being used. With book 6, a new pattern starts. Clearly, because the story is heating up as well. So now is just chaos, right? With all the other books in the Crippled God so far, Erikson clearly uses the word smell to create particular effects that's unique to that specific book or that specific passage in the storyline, because that pattern almost never gets interrupted. But now with book 6, Erikson now sort of starts mixing and mashing everything, and that starts reflecting the chaos in the story as well. So the first half of book 6 is all gruesome. You get consecutive references to the smell of blood, which I think once again is deliberate, because I've not seen any other description in the 10 big books used consecutively except things like the smell of blood, where you get the smell of blood, and then a few pages later you get something like the smell of blood once again before he uses the word smell for anything else. So that first passage in book 6 is all about blood and decay and all that. You then start seeing the word smell being used to almost reflect and twist the smells that we got earlier in the Crippled God. So if you remember earlier, there were references to the smell of smoke, and now suddenly it's the foul sense of smoke. There was some earlier reference to the smell of water. Now it's suddenly the smell of brackish water and rubbish. Earlier, someone mentions the heady smell of alcohol brewing. And now the description is, oh, it was one of the foulest brews she'd ever tasted. So Erikson takes these olfactory references from earlier on in the Crippled God, and in book 6 starts twisting those pleasant descriptions into disgusting, twisted, crippled, gross versions of themselves. More or less like what's happening to Caminsod. And then for a while in book 6, all the references as the action heats up, because book 6, the action really starts heating up, and then book 7 obviously, but book 6 is where the action really starts heating up, and all of a sudden the use of the word smell for a big passage in chapter 6 is all about fire and burning. So we get things like, I have my notes here, we get things like the smell of burnt fur, the smell of scorched flesh, the smell of melting candles, and things like that, where all the uses of the word smell are referring to burning and fire, melting, blah, blah, blah. And once he's done that, he circles back to the smell of blood, the smell of carnage, blah, 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 right? It's interesting because in the beginning of book 6, he uses the phrase the smell of blood twice consecutively, as I said. And at the end of book 6, he also uses the smell of blood twice consecutively, almost like it's sandwiching the passages in between about the fire and burning and all that. And as he's ending book 6, because it has to lead into book 7, he starts meshing the whole smell of blood, smell of water thing. And the very last line of book 6 is a really cool line, which I have written down here. Thick as blood, the smell of water filled the air. That's literally how book 6 ends, leading into book 7, which is obviously the final book of the Crippled God, which is itself the final book of the 10 big books, and blah, blah, blah. So then we get to the final book in book 7, and here's where Erikson starts wrapping everything up. There is, like, the scent of blood and all that, but there's also a very eclectic mix. So we get references to the smell of someone's perfume spiced hair. There's a reference once again to the smell of the sea on the wind. There's a reference to the smell of fresh pine, smell of iron, smell of leather, smell of otatoral, smell of sweat, smell of vegetables, blah 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 blah. And the fight scenes also have the same old, like the smell of blood, smell of glory, smell of death, blah blah, all that evocative stuff which gives Erikson's battle scenes that Saving Private Ryan feel. And once all that's done, finally, the last use of the word smell in the 10 big books overall is when Fiddler is having the conversation with that young boy at the very end, where the young boy thinks the bait Fiddler's using smells really bad. I think he calls it like a foul smelling bait or something. And it shows the contrast between the two of them, where Fiddler kind of teases the kid about using the bait to catch deep sea monsters. And the kid's like, oh, all you men are just liars. I'm going to be a great warrior someday, blah, blah. And Fiddler's like, looks can be deceiving. I mean, I'm sure all of you remember that final scene of the 10 big books. So, to recap all this, what I want to point out here is how each of these patterns that I've discussed very neatly fit into what each book within the Crippled God is trying to achieve. Whether it's lulling the reader and gradually pulling us into the story with these soothing and pleasant smells in the start, maybe to lull us into a false sense of security, or raising the tempo later on with harsher descriptions to sort of jar us out of that false sense of security, or the larger thematic elements, like the things like the smell of smoke, the smell of dust, the smell of ice, the smell of the sea. All of these obviously have much larger thematic significance to the story as well. They're not just words. And this is where I think Erikson takes the craft of writing to a level that very few writers achieve. Because any writing coach, any competent writing coach, can tell you and I that we've got to use sound and smell and touch to stimulate the reader's senses. But look at how Erikson is going way beyond that conventional wisdom. And this is just book 10, and this is just the word smell. We haven't even gone into the other books, and we haven't even the other novels, as in, and we haven't even gone into auditory stimulation, tactile stimulation, and all that, all of which Erikson does as well. This is writing on a level that's very difficult to reach, in my opinion. Now, was all this intentional or just a coincidence? Are all these clear patterns that I've identified, are they the result of a very deliberate and methodical philosophy that Erikson has about writing, where he's consciously chosen every word and where he is aware of these patterns that I've just pointed out? Is all of this deliberate? Or is this all unintentional, coincidental? I don't think the answer matters. Maybe the answer is a bit of both, but I don't think it matters that much, because either way, it sheds a lot of light on the writing process itself. Because if it was intentional on the one hand, then we perhaps hit on a certain element of Erikson's craft that has not been dissected as much before, not to my knowledge at least. I could be wrong. Or if the whole thing is just a coincidence, that too can be a major lesson on the craft of writing, because it proves that if you truly immerse yourself in your writing process, if you try to be as sincere as possible to the craft of writing, then things like this will organically, instinctively fall into place thanks to how devoted you are to your craft. So, even if all of this was entirely coincidental, there's still a major lesson that we need to take. I do hope Erikson clears it up. I do hope Erikson, I mean, maybe, lets us know what he thinks about this kind of analysis and how much of it was pre-planned and how much of it was organic. I mean, I think it would be interesting, but it's up to him, right? Obviously. And I've got to be honest, guys, these days, I find myself seeking out Erikson's interviews and discussions on writing a lot more than his interviews and discussions on Malazan, because I think there's a certain passion that Erikson has for the craft of writing when he speaks about it, and there's a ton of knowledge he has about the writing process itself, which needs to be shared. And even though the Malazan storyline is great, even though the characters are obviously great, even though the action is great, the scope is epic and all that, for a channel like this to exist, where we can do all kinds of ridiculous deep dives like what we've just done today on the word smell alone, in just the Crippled God alone, a channel like this would not exist without Erikson's passion for just writing in general. Because what it means is that someone like me has this endless ocean of material to just dissect to infinity, right? So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found this interesting. Will you see your high fist again next year? I hope so. I do have a lot of new ideas for a lot of new videos. I just need to get back to the dungeon more often and we'll see how it goes. I think I've done about 47 video essays or 48 at this point. So if you take away all the collabs and the book tags and all that, I think if we just look at pure video essays alone, I've done 48, 47 or 48 video essays. And if I can just get to that 50 mark, if I can have 50 of my own unique Malazan video essays out there, 50 of them, I think I would be, quite easily the greatest Malazan scholar in the entire world. And I don't think you guys would have any choice but to agree. So we'll see how it goes. I do hope I can post more this year. I just need to kind of sit down and do it, right? So this is your high fist. Wishing all of you a very happy new year once again. Take care, guys, and I'll see you soon.